morning, folks. Appreciate the time that you're taking to watch this. My name's Derek Sherrell, and I'm here today with Stephen to talk about all things accessory dwelling unit. Unless you live in Ashland, then it would be called an accessory residential unit. I'm a local builder. I'm a fireman by trade, and I'm really excited to share some information that I hope you all can use.
Great. Welcome, Derek. How did you become interested in ADUs?
Well, that's a good question, Stephen. I really became interested in what went from interest to an obsession. But the original interest was out of necessity to be a blue collar worker in this valley. I grew up here. I grew up in a low income situation with one parent. Never had a home of our own. I always bounced around from apartment to apartment. And as I got older and started making just a very modest income, I looked at homeownership as kind of like the American dream, like a lot of us do. And I couldn't afford anything. And the more research I did, the more I realized I was doomed. Like there was nothing that was going to allow me to break the barrier of homeownership. And that was until I found the accessory dwelling unit, the option of buying a place that had either space to build an accessory dwelling unit or room to convert an existing part of the house or detached structure into an accessory dwelling unit. And the odd part about this story is what I found and what changed my life was right in front of my eyes the whole time. So it was before I was a fireman. I was a carpenter, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Ashland, Oregon was actually on the cutting edge of accessory dwelling units, again, accessory residential units. You might hear me refer to both of them. ADU is the state language, ARU is the Ashland Municipal Code language. But Ashland was really on the cutting edge and was allowing these first as guest houses without ranges and then eventually into ARUs. And as a carpenter, I built dozens of these or participated in different segments of the process of building dozens of these for clients, for people that I was working for. And it never once occurred to me until I got really deep into the search of home ownership that I could potentially do this myself. So I got interested in accessory dwelling units out of necessity because it was the only way I would be able to afford a home.
Mm-hmm. And then it's gone on from there, and you saw an opportunity as a homeowner then to do something more. So what about somebody who already owns a home, but they may have space on their lot? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephen. So there's a lot of state legislation in Oregon. Oregon is very pro infill. You'll hear infill, missing middle housing. Basically, before we can expand our urban growth boundaries, the Department of Land Conservation and Development has pretty much said you have to infill what you have, cities, before you're going to grow. And the best way to do that is through the missing middle, which is really is, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and single family zoning and accessory residential units. The cool thing about ADUs is they take very, very, very little planning and development compared to the latter, the duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, etc. So I really tell people that they serve a million purposes. They can be for aging in place. They can be for your kids. Originally they were in-laws. They're called granny flats. They can be for extended family members. They can be for you while you rent your bigger house as you kind of downsize. They can be for rental income. But anybody that my kind of line is, if you can go in your backyard, side yard, or front yard and take 10 steps in two opposing directions, you probably have room for an accessory dwelling unit. So really, there are a few space constraints. There's some maximum lot coverage. There's obviously some zoning pieces, but if you have room to build an accessory dwelling unit, anybody that'll listen, I say this to, if you have room, you should at least consider it.
Excellent. And so what are those things that obviously the space you have to think about first, but then, once you say, okay, I have got some space, what are the first couple of things that you start thinking about as you're considering whether you should build a unit?
Well, there's a simple checklist that I've kind of developed just out of trial and error, and this is all out of by making mistakes. But first and foremost is, can I do it? Does zoning in your area allow an accessory dwelling or residential unit? So you can have the best plans in the world and the best lot and the biggest backyard, but if the zoning in the municipality that you live in doesn't, it's not an allowable use, you're not going to be able to. So I always say, go talk to your local planner. There is some really cool legislation, again, in Oregon that recently passed. I believe it's House Bill 2001, took effect in 2018, that stated Accessory dwelling units are an allowable use in every zone that allows an outright single family dwelling. There are some kind of parameters around that. I know I saw your 5-page worksheet was specific, but what I tell people is talk to your planner, because it's different. What you can do in Ashland and what you can do in Central Point and what you can do in Medford is all very different. One huge caveat there that I cross all the time is people call me and they say, Derek, I hear you know how to build an ADU. I hear you know how to design it and plan it. I want to build an ADU. And the first thing I say is, where do you live? And if they say, well, I live out on XYZ road, I say, oh my goodness, that's in the county and you can't do it. So that legislation that I was talking about, and don't quote me on every single number, but pretty close. I believe it was municipalities above 5,000 have to allow it, and counties above 10,000 in the state of Oregon have to allow it within the UGB. But if you're outside the urban growth boundary, which most of our county lands are, you cannot do an accessory dwelling unit. So that's the first place to start, is what is my zoning? It's really easy to find if you go to your municipal planner, or if you're savvy with tech, you go online, go to your city, go to departments. It's usually community development, and look at planning, and you can usually find their code and figure it out. But if you're okay with waiting 5 to 10 days for a callback in today's market, just call your local planning office and ask them, hey, can I do an ADU in my front, back, or side yard?
Excellent. And so then once you kind of get that kind of that clarity, what do you see as the project unfolds? What are the keys to success and really developing a really good working ADU?
Well, that's a great question. So there's a few of them. There's not just like 1, 2, and 3. I mean, the second thing I usually look at after zoning is financing. So you have a place where it's an allowable use in your zone. You could have all the ideas and all the space and all the plans in the world, but you're going to have to fund it. So where do you get the money? There's a lot of different ways. There's different lending institutions, local banks, credit unions. I would suggest, if you most likely already have a good relationship with a small local credit union, if it's Rogue, for example, look at potentially tapping into home equity. There's cash out refis. If you can build it with savings, that's the best. Sometimes I've worked with people who have moved their in-laws in from, say, the Bay Area, and they funded it with part of a Roth IRA as they were retiring. So there's a million ways to fund it, but you're going to have to figure out a way to fund it. So there's financing. After that, it's kind of like a layout and infrastructure thing. If you have a half acre in Ashland and it's on Morton Street and it's on a 30% slope, infrastructure might be your limiting factor. There's special codes for building on hillsides. So the layout of the land is almost third. Can I do it? How do I finance it? And where do I put it? If you have a big flat backyard, you might think, oh, I'll put it on the right side because there's a big oak tree on the left, for example. But probably the most important piece of infrastructure is doing a locate, finding your utilities, and most importantly, finding your sewer line. Because all of design and layout has to be based, doesn't have to be, but most of the time should be based on grade. Sewer falls with gravity. We've been using that system since the beginning of time because it works. So grade is very, very important for layout. There are options where you have to pump your waste, but really it's layout. Where's my sewer? So after somebody knows they can do it, they know they can fund it, I recommend that they call 811 and do a full locate of their property to find out where all their public and private utilities are. And then they can start the layout and design process.
Cool.
So if you start designing, most people, they get an architect and they start with the design because that's the fun part and you can see it and it's awesome. But if you don't do, steps 1, 2, and 3, you just spent a couple $1,000s you didn't need to. And all this stuff, again, I didn't preface this, but I'm all about advocating and consulting with people that do it themselves. All of this can be done by reading. All of this can be done by watching YouTube. I could not afford to go pay $200 an hour to a planner, or $200 an hour to an architect, or $2,000 for a set of plans. Like, before you know it, you're not even off the ground. There's not a shovel in the ground. You haven't even paid fees or permits and you're spending thousands of dollars. And I encourage people, don't spend a bunch of money. You can do this yourself.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen any of the plans that are pre-approved in the city of Medford? For ADUs?
Yeah, I have. I've seen several sets. Grants Pass has 2 sets. Medford has a couple that are Pacific Wall System builds. I believe Carlos Delgado has drawn a couple of sets. So yeah, there's a couple local cities that are on the leading edge of this, that give a homeowner or a potential buyer or a renter that wants to become a buyer, all facets of our housing market. They give them a huge head start. If you can walk into a planning office and they can say, hey, here's a checklist of what you need to do, here's a free set of pre-approved plans, you just save that individual, him or her, probably upwards $3,000 to $5,000 and 2 months of their life by that head start. So I know in talent, I've done some work with some plans that I've had approved a couple of times, that I've voluntarily given to this. I'm in the process of giving to the city, and talking with the county building official to say, hey, here's a really good 400 square foot footprint. It's pre-approved. It's built to prescribed framing. There's no engineering. You can modify switches and windows and move around a few things, but here you go. I designed this. It's nothing special. It's very rudimentary, but it works. It's free. You can come see one that I've built. You can look at it and touch. Some of the cities are doing. So yes, I have seen those.
That's great. Thank you. And any final words of advice or encouragement for a homeowner who's considering this?
I would tell anybody that that has the opportunity, that even if you don't have the money, you don't have the time, if it's an allowable use in your zone, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for long-term tenancy. We're in a housing crisis. It's a win for homeowners as we face the ever increasing costs of homeownership as our tax burdens rise every year. It's a great opportunity for family members as we choose to not put our older families in homes, and we choose to take care of them, or if we don't want to pay room and board for our college age kids, they can live at home. So there's a million reasons why anybody that has this option should at least consider it.